Holomind has been able to bring together a group of experts, people who are really interested in exploring the depths of psychedelics.
I feel it's a tremendous opportunity to educate people about what's going on around the world and to try to see about bringing it here to Poland.
Panel kobiecy to myślę, że był bardzo ważny głos w tej całej dyskusji, bo ciągle mało jest kobiet w nauce, również w tematach, które myślę dynamicznie się w tej chwili rozwijają.
Autentyczność prelegentów i gości to jest najbardziej wartościowe, bo te emocje czuć, słychać i te sytuacje, które są nieprzewidziane czasami tutaj, te są najcenniejsze dla mnie.
Poleciłbym wszystkim osobom, które się interesują rozwojem osobistym, dla których temat psychodelików i odmiennych stanów świadomości jest ważny i chcą to robić w bezpieczny sposób.
Jesteśmy czymś więcej, światem.
I have never seen a conference that ends at 10 p.m. and the room is still full of people.
People about what's going on around the world and to try to see.
Holomind has been able to bring together a group of experts, people who are really interested in exploring the depths of psychedelics.
I feel it's a tremendous opportunity to educate people about what's going on around the world and to try to see about bringing it here to Poland.
Panel kobiecy to myślę, że był bardzo ważny głos w tej całej dyskusji, bo ciągle mało jest kobiet w nauce, również w tematach, które myślę dynamicznie się w tej chwili rozwijają.
Autentyczność prelegentów i gości to jest najbardziej wartościowe, bo te emocje czuć, słychać i te sytuacje, które są nieprzewidziane czasami tutaj, te są najcenniejsze dla mnie.
Poleciłbym wszystkim osobom, które się interesują rozwojem osobistym, dla których temat psychodelików i odmiennych stanów świadomości jest ważny i chcą to robić w bezpieczny sposób.
Jesteśmy czymś więcej, światem.
I have never seen a conference that ends at 10 p.m. and the room is still full of people.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Magdalena Kaspryshin, and I would like to welcome you warmly to Holomind live panel discussion, Do Psychedelics Unite? Exploring the Integrative Power of Psychedelics. I'm honored to be joined today by pioneers in the field. So let me please invite to this conversation Dr. Rick Doblin, psychedelic drug advocate who is the founder and president of Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. Welcome, Rick.
Oh, it's great to be here with you, Magda.
Always happy to have you. It's a wonderful opportunity to speak again. I'm really glad. Our next guest is MD PhD Tomáš Páleníček, psychiatrist and researcher, head of NIMH Psychedelic Research Center, and co-founder of Cyrus Foundation and Scion Clinic. Great to have you, Tomáš. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you for the invitation. Good evening to everybody, and it's a pleasure to be here. Hi, Rick.
Hi, Tomáš.
Our third guest, Professor David Nutt, is still unfortunately on the way. I've been on constant talk with him, and I really hope he will be able to join later on due to some problems on the way. He will be trying to join a little bit later, so please keep your fingers crossed for Professor David Nutt to join as well. But I think that our guests tonight will be able to feel more than this panel actually is able to contain. So I'm not worried about our conversation's content. And today we will explore how psychedelics are shaping modern psychiatry, neuroscience, public health. I hope that we will also examine the neurobiological mechanisms and clinical applications, maybe potential societal impacts of these substances, and discuss whether psychedelics can truly serve as unifying force across disciplines, cultures, and communities. But we would also like to look at the challenges, ethical considerations, and the concept of integration, both at the individual and collective level. And I look forward to this deep, definitely scientific conversation, drawing on the expertise of our distinguished panelists. And I would like to start with my first question that actually is maybe a very general idea, but maybe it will just start the conversation and the discussion about the unifying aspect of psychedelic therapy, because now we are facing increasing interest in psychedelics across psychiatry and also neuroscience, public health. And I would like to ask you what interdisciplinary collaborations you believe are the most crucial to advance this field responsibly. Rick, maybe you'd like to start?
Yeah. Well, I would first off refer to a paper that was written about a year ago by the former director of the National Institute of Mental Health, Dr. Tom Insel. And what he said was that the real innovation of MAPS, the work that we've done, is not looking at MDMA, it's combining MDMA with therapy. And that all of the research with psychotherapy outcomes has shown that when you look at pharmacotherapy, like the SSRIs and other medicines that you can get from pharmaceutical companies that are taken on a daily basis, that are meant to reduce symptoms, that when you look at the therapies that are often used, prolonged exposure, cognitive processing therapy, things like that for PTSD, cognitive behavioral therapy, that when you combine the pharmacotherapy with the psychotherapy, the results are the best. So I would say from an interdisciplinary point of view, it's not just pharmacotherapy, it's also psychology and psychotherapy. So those are the two main ones that I would say we really need to be exploring, is how do we maximize the impacts of the psychedelics, which produce really profound experiences, also promote neuroplasticity, opening up opportunities to rewire the brain in different ways during this integration process. How do we combine them with psychotherapy? I would say some other interdisciplinary areas are really going to be about, when we talk about drug policy reform, is what are the cultural aspects of psychedelics? And I would argue that the drug war is fundamentally counterproductive. It's anti-science, counterproductive, promotes criminal undergrounds, and doesn't really address directly drug abuse. In fact, if those people need help, it pushes them further away from the system, from getting help. So public policy, I think, is one of the areas that will be profoundly impacted by the development of psychedelic research and psychedelic medicines. So many people have incredible misinformation about the risks of psychedelics, and other drugs, but psychedelics in particular, promoted by various government agencies in order to increase fear, in order to justify these incredible penalties that putting people in jail for things. So, for example, people still think that LSD causes chromosome damage, which it totally doesn't. People still think that MDMA is a serious neurotoxin, and that, as shown on Oprah's TV show 20 plus years ago, causes holes in the brain from taking too much MDMA. So I think this development of the science, development of the healing potentials in certain controlled circumstances will have a big impact on public policy debates. So for actually, one of the things that MAPS is involved with in the United States is called the U.S. Sentencing Commission. And while the Congress makes certain things illegal, the Sentencing Commission is what sets the penalties for distribution, trafficking, manufacturing, things like that. And so, for example, for MDMA, right now, if you have a pile of cocaine in one hand and a pile of MDMA in the other, and if they weigh the same amount, you'll end up going to jail longer for the MDMA than for the cocaine. And that was because these penalties were set up around 24 years ago, around 2001, and a group of us testified before the U.S. Sentencing Commission. But this was during this period still where the claims about neurotoxicity were so fearful and so prevalent. And so this idea that one dose, serious brain damage, major functional consequences, that was the story that was presented to the Sentencing Commission. And that science has since been completely disproven over the last 24 years. So trying to use the data that we generate from scientific research into these policy debates, I think, is one of the most important interdisciplinary areas. Another is just to say what's going on here. I'm in Belmont. Antonio Gracias, who's one of the lead investors, really, that has taken over control of the MDMA pharmaceutical company, now rebranded to Resilience. He's donated $16 million to Harvard to have the Divinity School, the Law School, and the School of Public Health and the School of Government all to get involved in trying to look at how psychedelics impact their various areas, not clinical research. So when we talk about interdisciplinary, there's been a major financial donation to look at what are the implications for spirituality, for training new ministers, for Divinity School. What are the legal implications? We have in the United States, and actually we're delighted, Tomáš can talk about it, but that the Czech Republic has now made access to psilocybin for medical purposes in this compassionate way. And now Germany has followed suit. And so there's a lot of translations, you could say, from the scientific research to this public policy debates and the legal systems, and then also the business school. So there's all sorts of for-profit psychedelic companies. How does the business professors and capitalism think about bringing these to market and trying to do it at scale to really treat the massive amount of 300 million plus people in the world with PTSD, more with depression, dependence, addiction. So I think the MAPS is called Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. So I think pretty much every discipline is impacted by the findings from psychedelics. There's a book called The Immortality Key that's about early Christianity and how it overlapped with the Eleusinian mysteries for several hundred years, which were a psychedelic initiation rite in Greece. And the claim is made that some of the early wines that were used in Christian services were spiked with psychedelics and psychoactive substances. So the history of religion, I think that there's just an enormous amount of interdisciplinary work that can be done. But I would say that I believe it starts with and it centers around the clinical research into medical benefits. That's where we really are showing that these highly demonized substances that research has been suppressed for multiple decades, that under certain circumstances with trained therapists, screening, that there can be way more benefits than risks. And that is what is driving all these other interdisciplinary efforts, that the science about the healing potential of psychedelics is what's opening up this interest in all these other associated fields.
Thank you, Rick. That was really wonderful. And Tomáš, what's your opinion?
Well, I cannot add too much to what Rick says, but I feel there's one important thing to realize that is that psychedelics are not they were here before the Western science and Western medicalization. So indigenous people and many other tribes around the world, they use psychedelics for healing purposes, but not in ill people, but also in healthy people during rituals. And psychedelics enhance their touch with nature and with the universe and in between themselves. And of course, medicalization of psychedelics is an important thing because obviously we would like to have some new tools to treat disorders like treatment-resistant patients and so on. But we sometimes maybe forget that many of the disorders are related to the overall well-being, and many of the disorders have kind of somatoform or psychosomatic psychosomatic cause. And I think psychedelics might not be helpful only in psychiatry, but they might also bring improvements into other domains of human health and well-being. And this is something that we should explore a bit more, and probably we'll hear a bit more about it in the near future, how to use psychedelics to improve well-being and to impact other somatic disorders like ischemic heart disease and all these psychosomatic issues that are overwhelming in current society. And so like the connection not only with psychiatry but with somatic areas or somatic clinical medicine is also something of very interest to me. I believe psychedelics, when treated appropriately and either used in a clinical setup to treat something or in rituals, might improve the well-being of people, and this could improve the overall healthy of the population. So that's one of the interdisciplinary things I have. And when you mentioned the psilocybin in Czech Republic, this is exactly because this is something, there is a law, but the law is not very functional yet. It should start working next year, and there's lots of work around the legislation or some legislative norms which are related to how it should be applied and to which diagnosis and so on. And this is also really interdisciplinary because we have to find the language between those who are from state drug control institutes, from Ministry of Health, from pharmaceutic section of Ministry of Health, from the Scheduled Drug Control Department and the Law Department. And there are patterns around all these topics. So it's facing quite a lot of things. It's really interdisciplinary. There are also voices like, okay, but these medications haven't been approved in large clinical trials yet. They haven't been registered. So we are dealing with something which is very non-standard in a way. And we might face ourselves to a risk from the United Nations because they design these drugs as not for clinical use because there's limited knowledge about their clinical effects. So all these people are bringing together all the ideas and trying to go around so we can use something that is impossible to be used in clinical setting, something that has a very difficult concept of understanding how it works because there are no placebo trials that would really fit with the placebo, like most of the trials are unblinded, so we have to deal with something very different than also the recent clinical trials which are using placebo. So that's the interdisciplinarity which I feel a part of Rick said, which was very interesting.
Yeah, Thomas, I'd like to just comment a little bit about what you said about the United Nations. So we actually do have some very sympathetic people on the International Narcotic Control Board, which is the group that monitors national compliance to the international drug control treaties. And they've indicated that medical research, medical use with psychedelics in no way has any kind of conflict with the international drug control treaties. This idea of making it available in a compassionate way, in a medical way, under supervision, is also something that I don't think that the WHO or the INCB will get involved with in any way. But from a practical point of view, what we've seen is something similar where various countries would open up medical marijuana programs before they were fully researched through double-blind placebo-controlled trials. And the International Narcotic Control Board every year puts out an analysis of sort of compliance with the treaties. And the most that they can do is they'll say, oh, well, we don't like this. There's very little enforcement mechanisms from that. And also there needs to be like trade embargoes. That's the kind of thing that they can escalate to, but that's never happened. So I think we can look at the whole evolution of, Canada, Uruguay, fully approving the legalization of marijuana that is in contradistinction to some of these international drug control treaties, but there's been no real pushback there. And so I think as long as it's encased within, compassionate use, it's still medical. I don't think there needs to be any worries that the INCB will come back, particularly at a time when fentanyl and the opiates are causing such destruction all over the world. They're not going to go after state, countrywide compassionate use programs.
Yeah, the truth is that there's not a compassionate use in Czech Republic. It's slightly different because we have defined a medical psilocybin, which is allowed to be used in the treatment a bit widely. It's not a compassionate use, and there will be some diagnoses where it could be used under specific circumstances. So it will be, let's say, a bit more restricted to who can use it and how it can be used, but it's not equivalent to compassionate use. So this is something that had to be faced and discussed on the level of the ministries and so on. So we'll see how this will evolve and what will be the final norm that will be the regulation of how it should be used. But it's slightly different than the German compassionate use, for example.
I see. Could you explain? I'm sorry, Magda, if this is off the track, but I'd be curious if you could explain a little bit more the differences. So I know, for example, in Switzerland, they can be treating people with LSD, with MDMA, with psilocybin. They can train therapists with those things. And I think that's kind of on a compassionate use. You still have to, have it by a certain number of trained people only can do it. In Canada, the special access program is considered sort of an off-ramp to the regulation. It is kind of compassionate use, but still there's individual patients have to be approved. So I guess I was just using the word compassionate use to mean access before the full phase 3 studies have been approved. So how is it different than compassionate use in Germany?
Well, the Czech system defines by law the medical psilocybin, and the medical psilocybin can be prescribed by a licensed psychiatrist or medical specialist with psychotherapeutic license. And then there's this sub-legislative norm, which decides in which disease conditions it can be prescribed, which is now a matter of discussion and a debate in between the ministry and specialists. Which are the doses and regimen, how it can be prescribed. So it can be prescribed to an individual patient to take it home, how many doses a month can be applied maximum, how is the maximum dose that can be used, etc. And there will be guidelines from the Czech from the Czech psychiatric communities, and that will be kind of a directive how it should be used, implementing psychotherapy and the description of the role of therapist and the clinician and the training, etc. There's not a possibility of a training, including the experience with the substance at the moment, but this is still in the process. And currently there is a working group that is focusing on that, and I'm grateful I can be part of it, so we can bring on the board something that would be meaningful and not allowing the widespread usage and the widespread use of psilocybin in an uncontrolled fashion. So it's kind of controlled, but in a way of guidelines and sub-legislative norms. So theoretically, anyone with the disorder will fit into the diagnosis that will be defined by the legislative norm can get to the treatment. But he needs to have specialists that are allowed to prescribe, specialists that are allowed to guide. And there's one specialty, it's only for individually prepared pharmaceutical preparations. So it's not for encapsulated products and so on. So it has to be made in the pharmacy on demand. So this is also, there are kind of lots of steps that has to be fulfilled. So it wouldn't be like everyone can get it at the same time immediately after the law is applied, and it will be regulated a bit by these ways. But I believe as time will pass, there will be more and more specialists trained, and more pharmacies able to manage that, and maybe we'll be ready for the first registered products in 1 or 2 years. With sufficient therapists and doctors experienced already when it will come on the market from the companies that are running large-scale clinical trials.
Okay. Just one more follow-up. Is it only for individuals, or can there be group therapy as one of the possible distribution approaches?
At this moment, it's not defined as such. Theoretically, it could be, if I think, well, it could be theoretically done in a group setting, but there are regulations on how the patient has to be monitored and so on. So I'm not 100% sure how this will be. But if the guidelines will allow it in the future, then I think it could be defined by the sub-legislative norms. So theoretically, it could be allowed. At the moment, I don't see an issue why it could not be used in this way if the other conditions are fulfilled.
Okay.
Gentlemen, I love this conversation, especially that this is a great achievement, Tomáš, and I congratulate you and the whole team on going that far. And I'm quite sure that this is just the beginning of the great journey. But I have a great news as well, because hopefully Professor Dr. Nutt will be joining us a little bit differently because we had this technical issue going on. But let's try and connect with Professor Dr. Nutt, Professor David Nutt, a psychiatrist, neuropsychopharmacology professor at Imperial College of London, founder of Drug Science, author of 40 books, more than 600 papers on psychedelics. And Professor, thank you so much for joining us, even though the whole technical issues are so demanding. You are really our hero tonight.
Well, yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Wonderful. Welcome.
Wonderful. So I apologize. The problem is that we've had a major strike in London, which made it very difficult for me to get home. And I'm still on my way home much later than expected. And I'm on a train, which has not got a great signal. But at least I can join in for a bit. There will be a serious interruption in about 10 minutes as we go through Britain's second longest tunnel. And then I'll rejoin you for a bit, and then I will have to change trains, and that might not work. But I'm here with you in spirit, if not.
Thank you so much. And really, we've had this kind of situations as well with Rick traveling one of our panels. So this is not the first time. And I think that it really well shows the approach of people connected with the psychedelic science, that, you know, we do our best, and this kind of difficulties are no difficulties for us. We can overcome all the troubles. So I can see that metaphor. Yeah, so hoping for you, Professor, also to join the conversation, I would like to ask another question to all of you gentlemen. We are, you know, at the great risk also of the fragmentation within the psychedelic field, as there are many queries, issues, and sometimes even clashes among people who take part in the field. So, how do you think? What are the risks, and where are the biggest risks? In which field? Scientific, regulatory, cultural, and maybe what collaborations could prevent them? Professor, maybe we can start with you.
I suppose, can I kick off a little, just since you've definitely got me for this period? Well, I mean, I think the biggest risk is if we harm ourselves. I mean, most revolutions are destroyed from within, and this is a revolution, and we really don't want to do that. So we should learn the lessons of previous ones, and I just think we should support Rick as much as possible, because he's almost at the finishing line.
Yeah.
And if he gets across it, then that'll be a lot easier for the rest of us to get across. So I think we should put any kind of intellectual disagreements. I mean, we don't know what the optimal therapies are. We don't know what the right kinds of therapy are. We don't even know what the right drugs are. But we do know that some, if not many of them, will work. And we should really put any dissent behind us and work together to encourage the whole field to move forward and to educate those non-believers, which there's still quite a few out there. That's my comment.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Rick?
Yeah, I would just add that the idea that what I've been trying to work on is bringing forth psychedelic medicine, the whole field of psychedelic medicine, which means that therapists in the future will be cross-trained with ketamine, with MDMA, with LSD, with psilocybin, with 5-MeO-DMT, with other substances as they come around, and then they will be able to customize their treatments for each individual. So the biggest risk that I see right now is, I would say, the for-profit psychedelic pharmaceutical companies that are trying to patent every possible thing that they can, even things that they didn't invent, in order to block other people and other companies and to block generics. So it's really capitalism entering into this field where what we talk about with psychedelics is that they have sort of transdiagnostic properties. They can be good for PTSD. They can be good for depression. They could be good for treatment of addiction. They can be good for social anxiety, anxiety related to cancer, things like that. And so this patent effort to try to divide everything and to make it so that there's only, every time somebody uses some new technique, they're going to have to pay somebody else some money, or every time that they want to use a new drug, or it's just going to be complicated from what's best for patients, which is empowering therapists and patients to decide together what's the therapeutic approach, what's the next substance to use, do they combine substances? So my big worry is, again, this whole sort of injection of massive efforts for different companies to try to patent everything under the sun, and then use that to not think of themselves as being part of the psychedelic ecosystem, and where, everybody benefits. There's more than enough suffering for all these companies to do well. But I think this kind of, other people are competition, other companies are competition. That's the biggest risk that I see.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
I-
Tomáš? Yes.
Yeah, I might see one of the risks in the regulators who need to change their mind. We know their efforts. They want to look on psychedelics in a slightly different way. And there was a big discussion last year in Amsterdam in EMA on how to look on these drugs, which unblind their effect directly, because people recognize their potency. And then the combination with therapy, because regulators, they want to hear, show me the drug which has a profile and what is currently available, and that it's safe, and then it will work. But in the case of psychedelics, there is the problem with this unblinding. There is a problem with the psychotherapy, whether to use it or not, and what then works. And it would be quite difficult to run a trial without any support, any explanation what the drug does and how the experience can look like. So there's always a bit more intervention and more care given to the patient than in a routine pharmaco studies where people just get some pills. They don't get an explanation on they get this explanation on effects, but there are no expected psychological effects, or if they are, they report them as side effects and so on. So this is something that we have to deal with, and that's definitely something that should convince also the regulators what treats. In fact, is it? Do we need to look at the drug itself that it has to be effective, or do we look on something which is more complex and a complex approach that could result in more beneficial outcome? We also know that antidepressants, they are more effective when combined with psychotherapy, but they wouldn't be approved if they will be combined with psychotherapy, because the regulators would say, okay, so then what treats? And so this is something we have to overcome in like relatively near future, I believe, in general, to convince them that this is a different concept of understanding how we can treat certain disorders.
Mhm. As this is a completely new field, it also brings completely new challenges, and I think that we need a completely different approach and a different language to speak to authorities and regulatory authorities as well about it, because it needs new solutions as well. But I was just wondering, as we are talking about possible threats and also the possible solutions, I'm really curious about your opinion about how psychedelics' power of uniting could be used also for bridging science with spirituality, because I think that this is one of the biggest clashes, and especially when you speak to very scientific oriented groups of people, they would completely undermine the spiritual aspect, and other way around. This is something that I feel has a very deep, let's say, power to be investigated and tried to be solved. Do you think that this part could be also united?
Well, I'm going to start here because I will have a tunnel soon. And I don't know what Rick thought or Thomas thought, but just last week, I think it was the LSD GAD study.
Yeah.
They didn't use therapy, and the results weren't as good as I would have expected if they had, and the market, I think, was expecting. So it might be that economics eventually forced the companies to what I think most of us think is almost certainly the best optimal therapy, which is combination therapy. And if the therapy is better in combination, then the outcome is better, then the value of the therapy is better, and I think it's more likely that it'll be paid for. So I'm hoping that if we can make enough arguments in favor of good outcomes with mystical spiritual changes added to the range of experiences, then the world will listen, and particularly payers will listen. But I also know now that Rick is, as I spoke with him the other day, he was talking with me the other day, he knows quite a lot about the way in which religious groups in America are particularly taking up psychedelics. So I'll hand over to him now.
Okay. Well, the first thing I'd like to say about the LSD generalized anxiety disorder run by MindMed is that they are really underplaying the support. They actually do provide support quite a bit. And they have instructed the people who are therapists and psychiatrists sitting with people not to say any therapeutic words. But they're there, they do preparation, they do integration, they provide support so they're just trying to pretend that there's no therapeutic intervention in a way in order for their stock price, they think, to go up. They're trying to avoid this issue about psychotherapy, but they're really providing a lot of support, and that is a big part of what psychotherapy is. And the psychotherapy outcome research has demonstrated that the most important factor in terms of whether people get better or not is what's called the therapeutic alliance. This idea that the therapists and patients feel that they're mutually understanding each other, they're supporting each other, and that's more important than the particular kind of therapy. This therapeutic alliance is key. So that's what MindMed offers, is this therapeutic alliance. You have people there that are supportive. And so they're just really trying to underplay that. The other thing I want to mention in terms of the spirituality is that the work in the 1950s and 1960s with LSD and psilocybin demonstrated that there was a relationship between the depth of the mystical experience, as measured by the Mystical Experience Questionnaire developed in 1962 for the Good Friday experiment and modified only slightly since then, that there's a direct relationship between depth of mystical experience and therapeutic outcomes. And that's for the treatment of depression, treatment of anxiety, treatment of addiction, substance abuse, all these different things. However, for MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD, we use the same mystical experience questionnaire. People don't score quite as high as they do with the classic psychedelics, but there is no correlation statistically between depth of mystical experience and therapeutic outcomes. That's now MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD. So I think many people have this idea that it's always about this mystical experience, the ego dissolution, that's the key operating factor for therapeutic outcomes. And I don't think that's the case for MDMA. And I also think that there's been very interesting work that's been done with 5-MeO-DMT for depression, with DMT for depression, with other substances, where you have this initial overwhelming experience for 10 or 15 minutes, but then you follow it by hours of therapy. And so that is a place where there is some really good evidence to suggest that this kind of spiritual ego dissolution combined with therapy can be really quite effective. There was a study that was conducted at Johns Hopkins that took years and years to be released finally. And this was religious leaders from different religious traditions who had a congregation receiving psilocybin. And then what they showed is, despite the religions that people came from, that many of these people, most of these people actually did have what they would call a mystical spiritual experience with psilocybin. And so I think there's going to be a lot of interest over the next couple decades of how do we revitalize spirituality and religion. A lot of religions have sort of devolved into fundamentalism and literalism, and everything is ultra orthodox, highly fundamentalist. But they've lost the thread and they're into the symbols, but not the substance. And so I think psychedelics can help people move beyond the symbols into the experience, into the substance, and then that can revitalize religion. So I think there's going to be a lot of work going ahead. And that can also be in terms of preventative medicine too. It's not only we treat people after they've got disorders. If people have social connections, they feel they're connected to something larger, they got meaning and purpose, that can act as a preventative for alienation, isolation, depression, things like that. So I think the relationship between psychedelics and spirituality is going to be one of the bigger areas going forward.
Yes, thank you. Tomáš?
Well, I was thinking what to add to this, because we are coming from a country which had spirituality nearly eradicated for a couple of decades due to the communist time. And like if I look into my neighbors or friends, there's very little people who are religious, and maybe our grandmas and grandparents in general, they were more religious than the current society. So I think it's also about whether the spirituality is within the society cultivated and whether we have the language to describe it and to talk about it. Psychedelics, they often offer experiences which are difficult to describe by words, and they are difficult to share with the others, and it's more likely to be shared with people who have kind of mysticality or spirituality developed in their life. And I think we should focus on cultivation of these principles and bringing them back to life, because life is not about materialism. It's about how we are connected to the surrounding world, and find the words and language how to connect this with nations or cultures that have spirituality on a very high level and cultures that do not have it. I remember I was first time trying to fill in the mystical experience questionnaire after the session with ayahuasca in the Amazon. And actually I looked at it and I said, okay, but I didn't have any mystical experience. It was something else, but definitely not something that fits within the mystical experience. And I was thinking, okay, but mystical experience questionnaire comes from US, and it comes from Big Friday Experiment and then Rolando. And this is something, this is a country with and people with very religious background. So for me, it was very difficult to understand. I didn't see anything of that. So maybe it's also about the understanding and language which we use to describe these experiences. And that was my adding to this.
Well, Thomas, just as a question, did you pay attention? What was your score on the mystical experience questionnaire? You didn't think it was mystical, but did you score to suggest that it was
Nearly
mystical,
nothing.
or
Nearly nothing.
ah, okay.
Close to zero in all aspects. But it was very powerful, but not mystical, because like I'm not used to dive in these areas. But the more I get in touch with these experiences and people, I have connection with indigenous people and so on, the more I try to understand these things. It's also maybe part of imprinting what spirituality role is in humans' life and how to understand it. So that was just my case, my personal experience, and I was surprised showing, okay, but I have zero on mystical experience.
Wow. Did you have this ego dissolution or this sense of being something larger, or how was that for you?
Well, not with ayahuasca. Not during the ceremony. It was very, very intense, but very focused. So there were visions, there were observations, there were meanings, but there was not such a strong ego dissolution, which I had in a different experiences, obviously.
Okay, because what you're pointing out, I think, is something that we haven't quite mentioned, which is that the context within which you take the psychedelic is really more important than the psychedelic itself. And how you interpret it, how you think about it, what kind of experiences are called forth. The context is really critical. Is it recreational? Is it therapeutic? Is it? And I think some of the things in the ayahuasca ceremonies are very much group oriented. And so you're really having to stay fairly in tune with this group, which keeps you grounded in a certain way. So even though they're religious services, the fact that they're in a group maybe doesn't permit people to sort of go into more of these individual ego dissolution kind of experiences.
Could be an explanation. It's definitely very different compared to having a substance in lab setting. And David's saying something.
Yes. Oh, I think that, yeah, that he just wanted to tell us that he would be disappearing in the tunnel, hopefully coming back. That there is some major strike in UK right now. That's why David is undergoing this kind of troubles, and unfortunately we are impacted with that. But I really admire his approach, and I hope really that he will be back. Yeah, but I love the way that you went into this this topic, connecting it also with the environment and the setting, because I think that it's also very important. And I think that it should be a part of the discussion as well, to maybe allow each and every person just to choose for themselves, as we are choosing what we believe in, or whether we believe in anything or not. But I think that still this is the very controversial part, and it makes a very easy target of psychedelics in the scientific area. I don't know whether you have the same impression.
Well, certainly people have talked about our therapeutic approach, which is basically supporting what's emerging. And we have a concept called the inner healing intelligence. This idea that we know that our body has an inner healing intelligence. You get a cut, your body restores the order. It returns it to the way it was before. There's limits. You can't just regrow an arm, but to much of an extent that we have this deep wisdom of the body, and that we believe that there's something similar in the mind. You know, that when you take a psychedelic and things emerge, there's an emotional logic. We support whatever's emerging. And so people have said, oh, this inner healing intelligence, that's a mystical concept, and that's not scientific. And you know, it's just it's probably as legit as, oh, the serotonin hypothesis. This is all about serotonin, and you know, psychedelics catalyze serotonin in your brain. That's also a neurobiological hypothesis that's utterly simplistic too. But nobody has to believe in that. It's just it's a way to explain why we support whatever's emerging as the key part of the therapeutic approach. So, yeah, we have been vulnerable, you could say, or attacked on the basis of, oh, this is such a mystical concept and it's not scientific. So I think there are those concerns. But just to talk about the controversy in a way, to get to the real heart of the controversy about the psychedelics and spirituality, the question is there a common mystical core behind all the different religions? You know, we have all these different religions that are saying we're the one right religion.
Yeah.
You know, and so the mystical experience questionnaire that Thomas scored almost nothing on, it doesn't have any particular, even though it was developed for a Christian service on Good Friday, it doesn't have any mentions of Christ or any specific religious figures. It's more an attempt to abstract what is this unifying mystical experience separate from particular religious traditions. So the big issue is there this sort of common mystical core underneath all these different religions? And then we can see religions more like languages, like, you know, luckily for us in America, for a while, everybody around the world had to learn English. So, but we're not saying English is better than Czech, is better than Polish. They're all different kind of ways to speak. And so, but when we get to religions, we have, oh, my religion is the right religion, yours is the wrong religion. And then even within religions, Catholics are hating Protestants and Sunnis are hating Shias, and there's all these different fights. So for me, I think this scientific research, I think, as a wild prediction, will eventually demonstrate that there is a common mystical core underneath all the different world religions, and that maybe that contribute to a more peaceful world where we can just stop trying to kill each other because, oh, I've got the right religion, you've got the wrong religion, and this is the only way to heaven, and all this kind of thing. And we will then just appreciate the differences in the different cultural backgrounds. So I'd say that for me is the most controversial, but also the most important.
I was just wondering, as you were saying that, whether maybe this is actually part of the problem that the Western so-called society using psychedelics that actually belong to indigenous people who use them in a completely different way. Maybe our problems and our approach actually is like goes outside and on the surface of it, and showing our approach of actually being competitive, trying to be better than others, proving that we are the best. And maybe that's why we have so many clashes, and trying to prove that there is a better religion and also a better scientist. And we tend not to cooperate, but we tend to prove that someone is the best or better than others. Maybe this is the problem of our civilization and the use of the psychedelic within it.
Well, I know Tom's about to answer, but I'll just say that I think that the humanity as a whole is needing to move from this competitive situation to cooperation, because now that we have the internet, now that we can speak like this, now that we're having our artificial intelligence, now that we have climate change that we know, now that we have incredible destructive nuclear weapons, that we need to be thinking on a global perspective. And that, you know, you can do whatever you want in your country about climate change, but it's not going to really impact unless it's joined by other countries in the world. So I think this idea of this constant competition, I would say that we've elevated President Trump in America, who's the epitome of competition and the opposite of collaboration. And it's all about hard power and selfishness. And so it's going to be very destructive. And I think we will see that this alternative to this America first, or, you know, I'm the best, or, you know, I've got power, so I'm going to try to force other people to do what I want, that we do need to work in this more cooperative way. And I think the ability of humans to cooperate is one of our strengths, why we're such a strong species. But we also have the corresponding you know, tyrants and people that want to, you know, bully others and just think about narrow who they are. So yeah, that's the core change. I'd say the last thing was in Abraham Maslow, the hierarchy of needs. We talked about it where it was self-actualization was, you know, your survival needs, your belonging needs, your self-esteem needs, your self-actualization as the top, becoming your full self. And in the last few years of his life, in confrontation with Stan Grof and psychedelic research in us, he switched it. So the top is now self-transcendence. seeing that we're part of something bigger, going beyond just yourself. So I think that's the psychological shift that humanity as a whole needs to make. And I think psychedelics can make a major contribution to that.
Thank you, Rick. Tomáš.
Yeah, definitely, completely agree. And just to comment on that, psychedelics are not the original medication or treatment for the society, because we can see it also from the other way around, which was very surprising to me when going back to the Amazon, because this is a lot of inspiration. And you see people who are still using their traditional way of life, and they're still going to their ceremonies and so on. But at the same time, they want to be connected. They want to have cell phones. They want to be in touch with other people. They want to have a better life. So they try to go out of the jungle. And they feel this is maybe their chance to get internationally accepted. And so it's kind of an infection, this drive for having more benefits, better life, and so on. Which, on the other hand, I agree, it's definitely better to have kids that survive and do not, 50% of them do not die of malnutrition or infection and so on. But then it's about how wisely we use these tools and how wisely we use the intelligence. And exactly, it's about the self-transcendence. If we are able to understand what is important, and I believe psychedelics can teach us what is important in the world, and that's how we should understand them and look at them.
Yeah, definitely. I've got, like, this brings me to my next question that I would like to ask you, but I'll just remind our viewers that you are also in the discussion. So if you have any questions that you would like to ask our panelists, please write them in the comment, and we'll choose the most interesting ones, and we'll ask them at the end of the conversation. So feel free to write, of course, respectfully, the things that you would like to discuss or the questions that you have, and we will try to talk about them later. And as you speak about indigenous tribes, indigenous people, the original culture that we borrow the psychedelic medicine from, as psychedelic research expands, I would like to ask you about your opinion, how we can ensure that traditional and indigenous knowledge systems are integrated respectfully into the scientific and clinical frameworks, because I think that this is also a part of conflicting ideas and minds in this subject.
Well, I think this idea of respect for these indigenous cultures that have sustained the use of psychedelics despite massive pressure over, millennium, actually, and driven underground. At the same time, I don't think we should be romanticizing the indigenous cultures as the one right way to do things. That they've often, over this, long period of struggle, have had to make compromises with the dominant powers, so that the ayahuasca churches are called syncretic churches, which means they've had to sort of take their beliefs and they've had to synchronize with Christianity. But some of the ayahuasca churches have gotten some of the bad parts as well, that they're patriarchal, homophobic, hierarchical, interested in who's the political power leaders, so that it's about giving proper respect, but that doesn't mean that we can't learn from and modify. And so the best example for me is this Draulio Arujo, who is a Brazilian researcher in Natal. And he originally started his own personal explorations with ayahuasca, but he's a neuroscientist, physicist, with a team of psychiatrists and therapists. And then they started working with ayahuasca inside the hospital for depression without a ceremony, on an individual basis. And they got really, really good results. But then he realized that ayahuasca is difficult for some people to swallow. It tastes terrible. It takes a longer period of time. And so he switched to DMT, smokable DMT, within like 15 minutes, and then several hours of therapy for also depression, and the results are as good or better than with ayahuasca. So is that cultural appropriation, or is that learning and respecting what has been sustained and developed in the indigenous cultures, but then applying it, you could say, in a Western medical ritual in a hospital. So I think that there needs to be this sense that we've learned a lot from the indigenous, and then the same way that Tomáš, you talked about how the indigenous want cell phones, so they're taking from our culture to theirs. We can take without it being wrapped in the exact same kind of religious rituals, and so I think that can still be respectful.
Thank you, Tomáš.
I think it's about the dialogue. It's about dialogue between us from the Western, let's say, society and them. They have different language, they have different cosmology, and they have different understanding on what is important, what is not important. I remember like when we were trying to explain them that we want to use EEG in the Amazon to study the brain activity, and some of them, and why they just said, and why is it so important? It's nothing to eat. So that's not an important part of the body. So there were other things that we could not understand, and yes, we are taking from them things that might help us understanding ourselves and may be beneficial for the health of Western population. At the same time, as Rick said, exactly, they're taking antibiotics to treat their kids. They learn how to make their environment protected from contamination from feces and that could be infected in order to prevent spread of diseases that could kill their kids and even the adult people. So I think it's about dialogue, to create ways and to understand and try to listen and try to understand each other, and then we can learn from it. We definitely can learn from ceremonies a lot, how to make the work with psychedelics safe. But exactly, cannot imagine that I will be in the hospital and trying to run a ceremony in a therapeutic context, because many people would look at me, are you crazy? This is not the way we should treat. This is a shamanism and we are in a Western society. So we need to make a bridge and not to be lost in translation, but we need to make a bridge between what they offer and how they make it, and between what we do and how we can make it. And that's the way we have to lead the dialogue and not to oppress. And as one thing I feel is quite important, yes, we get from them from a certain perspective much more. And what we're doing, we're patenting all the knowledge they have in many different ways. I don't mean us, but I mean in general. And is there anything coming back to them? And that's what we should think about. And especially the companies that invest. Of course, they invest and they need to get the money back. So that's why they make the patents. But it would be very wise to think about, okay, we've learned it from them. So can we return something back so we can preserve where it comes from and preserve the original knowledge and the people who gave it to us to keep them safe and healthy? And that's something what I miss. And some people have voices, quite strong voices on that, like Eduardo Schenberg, others not, and not sure how about the investors of all this pharma research which is ongoing now. But I think this is something that we should, that at least psychedelics should teach us, that we should be grateful for what happened, not only by words, but also by things we do.
Well said, definitely. Rick, would you like to add anything to this?
Yeah, I think this reciprocity idea is really very, very important. And that this idea of what you give back. We actually had a little bit of a funny discussion about, since MAPS has been doing a lot of work with MDMA, and MDMA was invented by Merck Pharmaceutical Company in 1912, what reciprocity do we owe to Merck for our use of MDMA? And so in that context, we've come to the conclusion that Merck got patents for the development of MDMA. They didn't use them, they didn't know what they had, but that was society giving them something for this invention. And then you get these patents, and then after a period of time where you can exploit the financial benefits of these patents, then it goes generic. So we concluded that we don't owe anything to Merck in terms of reciprocity. But I think that's different from indigenous groups that have done this really heroic efforts to try to sustain the use of ayahuasca, of mushrooms, of peyote, mescaline, things that have been under major attack. So I think the better companies think beyond just it's all about profits for the shareholders, and they will think about reciprocity. But that's a good way to separate companies that really understand how we're interconnectedness. When you talk about the Do Psychedelics Unite, we would expect psychedelic companies working with DMT or ayahuasca or others to want to do reciprocity for those cultures that sustained this during these long dark periods where there was no support, where it was criminalized and no research.
Thank you very much. And do you think that there is a way to avoid this this wrong capitalism interfering into the process of psychedelics entering the medical science? Do you think that there is a way to limit this, or our culture is based on this, and there won't be a way?
Well, there is a way. Oh, go ahead, Thomas.
Okay,
Yeah, I have one comment on that. We don't, we just, it might look like the pharma industry and the business is a bad thing. But I had a discussion with one of the colleagues and scientists who also worked for a big pharma at the time. And he said, well, look at it also from the other side. Like if there is a company, a small company that produces, or anyone who produces a drug that might be effective, and he runs a trial with 300 patients, and it shows an efficacy, it's great, and he goes for market. But does this person or this small company has the capacity to spread it around the world to all those who might need it? And then is a question, so yeah, there is a player on the market, and it's big pharma who can just, who have the support chains everywhere in the world. And they, even though they make profit on it, they can deliver the treatment to places where it otherwise wouldn't be available. So it's it has pros and cons on the two sides. And as I said before, it has to be wise, and the wise companies, they will invest into protection of the nature of the forest and the traditions as well. But I think what we should focus more on, teach also the indigenous people that they are not losing everything, but they might benefit out of it, as I said, with the antibiotics or vaccinations or whatever that helps them survive in these difficult conditions they could have otherwise. So yeah, there are always two sides.
Yeah, I would add though that there is one thing that can be done, and there's a nonprofit group in Wisconsin called USONA that's trying to develop psilocybin for major depressive disorder, and they've created a group called Porta Sophia, and they are a repository of prior art to be used by patent examiners, so that this kind of proliferation of efforts to patent everything, even if you didn't invent it. Porta Sophia is really important as an organization to try to make sure that the patents are not overbroad and that people only really patent what they've uniquely developed. So as Tomáš said, I do believe there is a role for patents. So from 1986 to just a few years ago, MAPS, Beckley Foundation, Council on Spiritual Practices, the major nonprofits, the Hefter Research, we've raised somewhere in the neighborhood of $300 million in donations, and more in people working for free or volunteering their time or under market. But in the last 4+ years, there's been over $4 billion put into psychedelic research by investors. So there's going to be an enormous number of discoveries of new things, of new drugs, because of investors, and they're doing that in large part because of patents and the ability to have monopoly positions for a period of time. So there are legitimate aspects for patents. It's just that you tend to see pharma companies doing massive overbroad patents. And so Port of Sophia's, I think, is a really important tool to try to really educate patent examiners so that they give valid patents, but just not invalid patents.
Thank you. And before we go into the questions from our viewers, I would like to ask you one final question from me. Still hoping that David Nutt will come back, because I know that there is still a chance. I am not a quitter, so I hope that he will just come back for at least to say goodbye with us. But I have a question to both of you. If you had to choose one core value or maybe practice that could help us preserve the unifying power of psychedelics, what would that be? Tomáš.
Well, that's a difficult question. There's so many. I think if we understand them as they are teachers, they always can teach us new things. Every unique experience is unique, and it tells us about ourselves and about the world around us. So they're teachers, and it's not magic medication. So we should be open for teaching, for learning, and let them teach us.
Okay, thank you very much. That's beautiful. Rick?
I would say transparency is the core value. I would say that right now we're entering into a period in the United States where it's very difficult to believe anything that our government says, either Health and Human Services or from the president on down or anything. And so I think the response should be transparency, that the pharmaceutical companies, the data, that all of this be made transparent, made public, the discussions between the pharma companies and FDA be made public. And actually, the FDA has done a great thing, I think, in that they have, about a month and a half ago, they released quite a few what are called CRLs, complete response letters. These are letters that the FDA gives to pharma companies when they apply for having a new drug approved, and these are the letters rejecting that. And they've made all that public for drugs that were eventually approved. And then just about a week ago, they've made a whole nother tranche of CRLs public for drugs that still are in the process, including the one that rejected Lykos and its application for MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD. And so Marty Makary, who's the head of the FDA, talked about radical transparency. Now they want everybody to learn from all of this. So I think that's really good on the part of the FDA, but it should be matched by the pharma companies. So I think transparency will be really the way to help society understand that if there are decisions favorable to psychedelics, that they'll be based on the data and not just on the whims of certain politicians who either like or don't like psychedelics. So that for me is the core value, because that's how we'll establish trust. And also that is the essence of science, is you make everything public and then you have people try to disprove your hypotheses and you go back and forth, and that's how we evolve. So yeah, transparency is the key.
Thank you. That's also beautiful. And I think that it's about time to check what kind of questions our audience has for you. Okay, the first one: can psychedelics really help us face our shadows? And what makes the difference between healing and getting stuck? Whoever would like to comment on that, please feel free.
Well, I'll say the difference between healing and getting stuck is resistance. You know, if difficult stuff comes up and you resist it, you're gonna be stuck. And this idea of opening up to and experiencing fully. Stan Grof has said that the full expression of an emotion is the funeral pyre of that emotion, meaning everything's in motion, everything's moving, everything. So that if you fully experience something, then you've incorporated it, life will move on. But if you resist it, you'll keep it around longer. And as far as facing our shadows, there's a quote by Jung that I use in a lot of my talks that I think is very profound. And he says, the most important political, spiritual, and therapeutic thing we can do is to withdraw the projection of our shadow onto others. And I think one of the ways that we can withdraw the projection of our shadow onto others is to accept and experience the shadow parts of ourselves that we don't want to see, that we, push off onto others. And psychedelics in a therapeutic context can be very helpful to face our shadows.
Thank you very much. Tomáš?
Completely agree. And I go back to what I said before. Psychedelics are teachers, and they can teach us about the good things and also about the dark things. And what we can learn through the experience is to become observers and not to try to escape, avoid, and just to go straight forward to understand what it offers. So I think it can help overcome our shadows and understand them and do the change. So that's part of the healing. And it doesn't mean that every experience has to be full with oceanic boundlessness and resulting in long-term improvement, immediate in mood and so on. It can bring in things that can mature over time, and we can use them much later than we might think about. And this can be the teaching that can face and overcome our shadows.
Thank you very much. Beautiful. The next question, is it actually possible to get rid of the ego? I feel like maybe we can't fully lose it. We can only become aware of it. Quite deep. Who would like to start?
I'll take that one. I think it's completely right. I think that ego death gives the wrong impression that somehow or other ego's dead. So we are humans. We are born, we die, we have this whole arc of life, and the ego is about organizing how our perceptions are so that we can sort of sustain and protect and thrive as individuals. So not only do I think that we can't fully lose it, I don't think we should fully lose it. And so I think ego dissolution is a better way than ego death to describe it. But again, I go back to one of the things that Stan Grof has said, which was about being transparent to the transcendent. So when your ego is transparent to the transcendent, you see that we're part of something bigger, but you don't deny the fact that we are also individuals. We're both individuals and part of something bigger at the same time. It's like light is both a wave and a particle. We're both of these things. And so we need the ego. And what we see is even with 5-MeO-DMT or these most powerful substances that blast us past the ego into these things, that the ego keeps restoring itself after these things, that we can take a certain amount of confidence from that you can let go, you can be blasted into the universe, and something after a while restores your sense of self. And that's because I think we're a human in a body that's moving from birth to death. So being transparent to the transcendent is like having a clean filter. It's not like the window is gone. We see the world through our ego, through our sense of self. There's always filtering. We're not seeing things exactly as they are. But I do think that the ego needs to be put in its place. And so I think we have with Trump and other people like that the ego is the most important thing, that they are the most important thing in the world. It's all about them. It's the ego needs to be more in this sense of self-transcendence as well. It doesn't mean that you transcend yourself, but you still are a self. And I would compare it to the period of time hundreds of years ago with Copernicus and Galileo, when everybody thought that the Earth was the center of the universe. And now science was demonstrating that isn't the case. And so what did the church do? They went after Galileo. He died under house arrest. They made him try to recant. He did say famously, and yet it still moves, which is beautiful. But that I think humanity needs to move from this sense of that we are the most important thing, that our egos are the most important thing, that we're not the center. Each of us is not the center of the universe, and that we need to move into this more cooperative, collaborative way of thinking that I think psychedelics can be very helpful to. But I think we need the ego as well.
I totally agree. No, Tomáš, would you like to add anything?
No, like without ego, we wouldn't be able to navigate in this material world, let's say. It's very interesting. We can lose the ego with anesthesia or let's say, experiences which completely dissolve the ego. We don't know who we are. And this is not very typical for psychedelic experience because we usually still have some sense of ego, even we speak about the death of ego or ego distortion, whatever. But like with delusions, with drugs that cause, they're acting through cholinergic receptors and create full delirium. People are just in a complete different reality. And I believe also part of this is reflecting to 5-MeO when people get to this state where they have kind of a blackout, they don't remember. So that's maybe when their ego is lost for some time. But the question is whether they are conscious about that, because usually also the memory formation is lost. So, but I think they can, psychedelic experience are maybe cultivating our ego a bit.
Sometimes, yeah, and I think that it might be another reason for later on problems and conflicts that actually is the result of the boost. So this is another part of this. I would like to share with you some comments because we've got 3 very interesting comments, and I think that you need to see that. I am Czech and I'm also very, very proud. Yes, we are all proud. I think that this is a beautiful comment to you, Tomáš, but I think to everyone connected with the movement. I'm so grateful we are having this open discussion in Poland and in Europe. Yes, I think that this is a great place to have this discussion. This is thank you for the voice about competitive behaviors. Yeah, I think that this is the voice that we are observing. But I think that we've got more questions. Yes, this is one more question that we would like to ask. What if ceremonial group setting carries the most healing value and not the substance itself? How would you like to comment on that, gentlemen?
Well, as I've said before, I think the context is critically important to what happens. I mean, people can take psychedelics at parties and you can have a wonderful time, but it's not necessarily therapeutic or healing. So I agree. Now, is the ceremonial group setting the most healing? I think for some people, it would be an individual session, but in a therapeutic context that is the most healing. For some people, they may find the groups more effective. And so what we just really need to do is, as we report psychedelic research, we need to do much more explanation and discussion about the context that the psychedelics are being treated in. And I'll say that there's a really important study that's starting soon in Israel that is the first and the only study ever in the world to directly compare individual therapy versus group therapy. This is MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD, for people who have PTSD from the October 7th Hamas attacks. But it's the first one that will ever directly compare individual versus group. And again, I think that I would accept this idea that the context is more important than the substance. And this gets back to something earlier, Magda, you were saying about, I don't think that some of the things that the FDA is saying, like we want to see research with the drug by itself. You know, that's the way Spravato was approved. Ketamine was approved by itself without any therapy, just with people being under observation, not even by therapists. And that's suboptimal. It's really good for the pharma companies, because when you don't combine it with therapy, the results fade. They're not that durable. What you need to do is buy more drug, and that's what they care about more than the patient outcomes. And so we definitely need to think about scaling, lowering the cost, group therapy, but there's different kind of ceremonies. So that's the point. There's religious ceremonies, there's medical sort of Western therapeutic ceremonies, all different kinds. So I don't think it's a problem. What if? I think it is the case that the context is more important than the substance itself.
Thank you. Tomáš, would you like to?
Yeah, I would add to it, it's like healing. It doesn't necessarily mean healing someone who is, let's say, ill, who has some pathology. The ceremonial setting is usually not meant for healing specific disorders. And we had a discussion with Ninawa, which is from the Hunnikui tribe, and he said, no, when we treat someone who has some mental issue, they call it Shinashakabu, for example, or something like that, they treat him, the shaman who has the experience and who has the skills to treat. He takes him separately and works with him in different ways. It's not only the ayahuasca ceremony that heals. I would say it's definitely societal healing, let's say, or keeping the traditions. Jerry Merbe says ayahuasca is the television of the forest. That was taught to him by Juan Flores, the maestro from Mayantoyaku. And it's just like showing you images, and then the interpretation is on yourself. But this is definitely part of a healing and teaching, but it's not the same synonym as for, let's say, medical healing of someone who has specific problems. So they're two different concepts. From the other side, we know that there are individual therapies, individual psychotherapy and group psychotherapy. It has very different dynamics. And in the group therapy, there's much more, it's very important, the interaction between the patients who can share their experiences, who can mirror the emotions the people have in the group. So this is it's like a living organism. It's a very different dynamics than the individual therapy. And if we can learn from, let's say, the ceremonial setup, it's something that is related to viewing and understanding, and we can get it maybe to make the administration of psychedelic and the psychedelic sessions more safe, more also cost effective. But the healing process starts afterwards, where people get and they integrate, and when they integrate on individual and group basis, it's not that important. But each of these approaches can bring an important part of the therapeutic process.
Thank you very much. Two more questions, maybe. Would you consider rave culture to be an indigenous practice for MDMA? Very good question. And it's Sierra Reynolds. Okay, psychedelic care. Great. I'm really happy to see you here, Sierra. Yeah. So essentially, PAT group therapy. Yes, maybe Thomas, maybe you would like to start with this.
We all went to race at some point, and we sometimes go, and it's definitely a healing process. We need to relax, and dance itself could be a ritual that helps and might heal some things. But again, we speak about healthy population or population that has a problem, pathology. And there are pathologies that are, let's say, driven by the societal pressure and the lifestyle. And there are pathologies or disorders which are driven more by, let's say, the genetic background, the development, and so on. And each has to be treated differently. So for healthy people, partying is definitely a good time to relax if it's not too often. And it could have some negative side effects as well, but it's not meant for therapeutic. It's not a therapy for people who are really suffering. It's a very different story.
Although I would add something different to that slightly, which is that one of our fundraisers at MAPS for a while, no longer working at MAPS, he's gay, and he said that during the 1980s, which was really the birth of the rave culture, and the early 90s, before they really had protease inhibitors to help treat AIDS, it was pretty much a death sentence. And what he said is that he and his friends worked out their grief with ecstasy on the dance floor. So the rave culture was very healing, very communal, this kind of celebratory ability in the midst of all this tragedy to keep their spirits up. So I think we have a deficit in Western culture of rites of passage that really have power the way that they used to, either when we're 12 or 13 or college graduation or any kind of these rites of passage. rituals don't work that much. And I would say beginning with Ken Kesey and the Grateful Dead and the whole acid tests and the kind of those kind of concerts and the rave culture, that there are definitely healing spiritual opportunities for people. It doesn't mean that everybody gets those healings from them, but I would say that they are a response to the lack of deep power to traditional rites of passage, and that rave culture is definitely an indigenous practice, and it's done in groups. I do want to add an interesting point, though, which is that the same person that I mentioned said worked out their grief on the dance floor with ecstasy also brought MDMA back. He's very interested in the ayahuasca cultures, and he brought MDMA not too long ago to Brazil and shared it with some ayahuasqueros who found healings from the MDMA that they had not gotten from the ayahuasca. So that this is sort of part of this reciprocity that we're talking about too, is bringing other substances so that we learn different things from different substances. And I think one of the biggest inventions has been in our Western culture has been the rave culture and Grateful Dead concerts, things like that, to promote group experiences of communion and spirituality and healing.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, last question. How to work with the experience of disconnection from oneself? Tomáš, maybe you'd like to start?
This is something, well, it depends if this connection is only during the session or if it's something that persists afterwards. And this is something that typically is present in people with PTSD. They're disconnected from themselves. They do not access their emotions, and they suffer from that. And eventually, later on, they can develop depression. It's definitely hard work to understand that when you just like don't feel you're in touch with yourself, and it definitely can result in a difficult problems. That's what I saw, and I also saw it after one patient with MDMA who actually disconnected from herself, and she had this issue, which was like persisting for some period of time. Could be very resistant to treatment. What to do? Well, this is we were thinking maybe more therapy sessions would be helpful, but as the study was designed only for 2 MDMA sessions, it wasn't possible to continue. So then we worked with a psychotherapy. During the session, I would recommend, like, this is part of the experience. Let's become an observer and just observe what it tells you about yourself when you're disconnected from yourself, and just like keep the role of an observer, and it's always a way there and back. So you might experience unpleasant, anxious disconnection, but it usually returns, or always returns back to normal. But the disconnection that is driven by a traumatic experience and is very difficult to treat, and definitely needs lots of psychotherapy. So that's my point of view on that. We call it dissociative disorders frequently, and this is quite difficult to treat, or dissociative symptoms, which is typical for ketamine, by the way.
Yeah, I'll just add that when you're traumatized, dissociation is one of the strategies that people often use. Like, you're not really there and you're dissociated from what's happening. But then after the trauma is over, assuming you've survived, it makes it more difficult for you to heal because you're separated from yourself and from those emotions. And so what we see in our MDMA-assisted therapy phase 3 studies is that people that are high on the dissociative subtype are considered the most difficult to treat, but MDMA really works with them. MDMA is very integrative. It helps people to reassemble their parts, you could say, if we talk about internal family systems or different that we're all not one unified self. We have all these different parts, and that MDMA, I think, can be really very helpful. And we showed that those people that are high on the dissociative subtype statistically did better even than those that didn't have that, because I think they were so hungry for this and so in need of this connection. And the fear of the emotions, the fear of the memories is what makes it so that the disconnection is difficult to overcome. And so that's where the MDMA reduces the fear, and then you can process, and then that is tremendously healing for people that have been so dissociated. So yeah, I think it can be really helpful.
Thank you very much. And as much as probably we'll be shortly finishing our wonderful conversation, unfortunately, David Nutt has never come back to us, but we'll have a chance to see him actually during our conference that you were a part of, Rick, last year. And it was a marvelous experience to have you during the Hollow Mind Integration and Therapy Conference. I'm really sorry that we will not have you this time, but you will be joining us for MAPS training this October in Warsaw.
Yes.
Wonderful. But definitely David will be at the conference, and Tomáš, you will also attend as a speaker. So both of you will give 60-minute speeches. So I would really like to invite everyone to join this conference, and you can check our previous conference in the link that probably will appear somewhere here in the chat, and definitely see what is going to happen. I only hope that it will be better than the previous one, but I also hope that next year or the next edition, Rick, you will not omit, because it's impossible that we don't have you. It's like it's a big mistake this year that we haven't managed to schedule you.
Yeah, I'll actually be in Antarctica at that time, so won't be able to come. But I very much look forward to returning. And this time when I come for the conference, I'll just add that, for the training of therapists, that I'm going to take an extra day. My grandfather left Poland in 1920. And so I've been doing a lot of historical research. And so I will be going to the town in Poland that he came from after the training. So I'm really 105 years later, when he fled Poland for his life, fleeing anti-Semitism, now I'm returning to try to help bring MDMA and psychedelics to Poland.
This is beautiful. And this is a part of what I had a chance to speak at the Denver conference. Thanks for invitation about this transgenerational stories that we have and traumas, but also beautiful messages that we take from our roots, actually. So that's wonderful. And we are happy to have you back. And I'm really glad, Tomáš, you will come to Poland to have a speech at the conference. It will be a tremendous experience for us. So I think that I would like to invite everybody who hasn't got the ticket yet, please come over and hear our great speakers. It will be a wonderful experience. The 15th and 16th November, the day before, there will be some trainings done, some workshops, but the 2 days will be all lectures and wonderful experience of integration and experiencing psychedelic science in practice. So whoever doesn't have the ticket yet, please don't make this mistake and don't miss out this time. I know that it's not very modest to say, but I know from other people that it was excellent last year. So I hope
it was.
Thank you. Thank you, Rick. Now it's officially said out loud. So thank you very much. And I would like to thank you very much for this conversation. It was really important. I feel that we've touched so many different topics. It's clear that psychedelics are not just a tool for individual healing. They've got the potential to unite different fields, and not only science, but maybe bridge cultures and maybe religions, as you both said, and from neurobiological insight to clinical applications, indigenous knowledge, modern psychiatrists practice well. I really hope that the bridges will be built and there will be only more united approaches rather than competition and fighting for the primacy. So let's leave this model. We have already been there. It doesn't work. So let's go somewhere else with that. I would like to sincerely thank our panelists. Well, Professor David Nutt is not here, but I would like to thank him very much, especially for this heroic joining from the train. Dr. Rick Doblin, thank you very much. Dr. Tomáš Páleníček, thank you very much for sharing your invaluable experience and vision. And thank you, our audience. Thank you for engaging with this conversation, and let's continue exploring how we can responsibly harness this integrative power of psychedelics for the benefit of individuals and maybe communities as well. And so thank you very much. My name is Magdalena Kaspryshin, and you have just watched HoloMind live panel. See you at another panels, but definitely at the conference as well. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you too. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
People about what's going on around the world and to try to
HoloMind has been able to bring together a group of experts, people who are really interested in exploring the depths of psychedelics.
I feel it's a tremendous opportunity to educate people about what's going on around the world and to try to see about bringing it here to Poland.
Panel kobiecy to myślę, że był bardzo ważny głos w tej całej dyskusji, bo ciągle mało jest kobiet w nauce, również w tematach, które myślę dynamicznie się w tej chwili rozwijają.
Autentyczność prelegentów i gości to jest najbardziej wartościowe, bo te emocje czuć, słychać i te sytuacje, które są nieprzewidziane czasami tutaj, te są najcenniejsze dla mnie.
Poleciłbym wszystkim osobom, które się interesują rozwojem osobistym, dla których temat psychodelików i odmiennych stanów świadomości jest ważny i chcą to robić w bezpieczny sposób.
Jesteśmy czymś więcej, światem.
I have never seen a conference that ends at 10 p.m. and the room is still full of people.